Sony, thank you very much for coming here today at the European Climate Foundation to explain the causes of the finance and euro crisis. We'd very much like to understand from you what is at the root of the inability of the financial sector to invest in clean energy, in energy efficiency and everything low carbon.
Right. Okay, well there's a number of obstacles that come into play. The first is that finance has a short-term perspective, and that's because everybody gets paid primarily on the basis of yearly bonuses, for example, which instantly penalizes green investments, because as we know, green investments look good in the long term as the savings from not having to use fuel accumulate, and of course even before the effects on environment are taken into account. The second problem is there are a number of small energy efficient investments which are too small for individuals to look at. So you would recognize that it would be completely nonsensical for financial markets to invest in helping you change the light bulbs in your house, right? But if it came to helping a whole community to change light bulbs in their house, this would be a very profitable investment. But there are significant friction costs here, aggregation costs, that things that are relatively small, which no one person has an incentive to do, need to somehow be pulled together. And right now that is not being done. Another perspective is because of the uncertainty, and as we know, the carbon price now within the European ETS has fallen more or less to a record low. It's not at a useful level that helps generate an incentive for green investments. So even though from a policymaker perspective, you talk to policymakers, then it will all agree that the future carbon price is going to be higher. You talk to people like us, we agree it's going to be higher. You talk to financial markets, they all agree it's going to be higher. But nobody is able to agree what level and when. And this means that when you are making financing decisions today, there's a coal-fired plant, there's a wind turbine. The best estimate you have for carbon prices is the present price, with maybe a little bit of safety margin here and there. But there is no reliable future anchor for what the carbon price is going to be 5 years from today, 10 years from today, 20 years from today. And so in this uncertainty, it's very difficult for the financial sector to take into account what would actually turn out to be a carbon price in the future. So this uncertainty also does not help. And so these are some examples of short-termism, the aggregation costs in terms of energy efficiency, as well as the uncertainty around green investments. There is another fourth point, which is if you look at the average coal-fired plant, we've had coal-fired plants for years and years, decades. They have a full operational record. We know how the profits work. We know what the maintenance costs are, all of those, right? Slowly, as wind turbines have become more mature, we are starting to become more certain about what the total lifetime operation of the wind turbine is going to be. How much wind there will be and what energy it will generate, plus what the maintenance costs are going to be. But for many of the newer technologies that are coming into play now, you have new kinds of solar cells coming in, you have tidal power, etc. These are new things that nobody has a history of. And the financial sector, anytime there is a lack of information, charges a higher risk premium. So I think this is another threshold effect, and which is where there's a role for public policy and possible short-term public subsidy, where the kinds of new technologies, where there is no established lifetime cost, there is no established lifetime maintenance cost, you don't know how long it's going to last, etc., etc. Plus the risk of new technologies which are even better coming in and making these relatively new technologies completely irrelevant. So there are all these issues which act as barriers into green investments, and these can all be overcome, but they need specific policy action.
In the current environment where governments are reducing subsidies, are resisting more policies at EU level on energy and efficiency or climate generally, what is an example of a good policy you think that could be palatable to governments to do this?
So now we know that there is a big issue which is being discussed, which is the competitiveness of European countries, in particular the countries in crisis. Greece, Spain, Portugal, etc. And right now what is being discussed and tackled is wages. Now, the total production cost of, let's say, having a car factory in Greece versus having a car factory in China. Now that total, what really matters is the total cost, of which wages are one component. And I think we need to get governments, and they would be willing to consider not just looking at the wages, but actually to look beyond that at other sources of cost. And of course, Europe is a net energy importer. We import about 3% of GDP of oil and gas every year, which is very substantial. And if we are able to rejig the argument on competitiveness of manufacturing in the European Union, at least partly in terms of how to reduce some of the other non-wage elements, because from an economic point of view, it doesn't matter whether you reduce someone's wages or whether you increase energy efficiency and reduce the import bill. Plus there's the additional advantage, which is most of the wages that European workers get, they get spent within Europe. But the imports that we do is money that is lost to us, and hence reduces the aggregate demand and makes it harder to repay the debt level that we have. So I think that this is one small idea that could definitely help. The second is, there's a significant number of sovereign wealth funds, and we know oil prices are high, and all the oil producing countries are doing very well. So Norway is doing very well, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is making a lot of money, the Kuwaiti Sovereign Wealth Fund, and so on and so forth. Now these sovereign wealth funds, they are very heavily exposed to the price of oil, because that's where they get their new money from. And what they can be convinced to do is to, from a pure economic perspective, deliberately target green investments which diversify their risk, because they're excessively exposed to one risk factor, which is the price of oil. And the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, for example, has started to take some steps along these lines, where it has set up a special green window, a green investment window. It's just a pilot project for now. But to put this idea on the mainstream, and one thing that the European leaders could easily do is to try and pull together, maybe through the help of the European Investment Bank, a series of green investment projects within the European Union, to pull them together and to offer them as a portfolio of investments, deliberately targeting the Kuwaiti Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, etc., and saying, look guys, this is something that is good for you, because it's going to diversify your risk, and it's good for us because we desperately need money and investment. And this could definitely work at a macroeconomic level.
In today's seminar, you advocated carbon stress tests. Maybe you could explain in a couple of words what you mean by that.
Oh, absolutely. So when you have the current incentive systems within the financial sector, which don't take into account the environmental costs, which don't take into account the longer term savings that can come from, say, renewable energy, it means that both our pension funds and other, including sovereign wealth funds, the asset management side, as well as banks, which are the credit institutions, are putting too much money into, say, coal-fired plants, into gas turbines, into other investments which are bad for the environment. And hence, the flip side being that means they are carbon intensive. And the flip side of that is that if policy measures are taken, which we hope they will be, that carbon prices in the future are going to be higher, they are heavily exposed to the downside risk of that, because they will lose out, these investments will lose out. So because nobody is making these banks and these pension funds take into account these risks that they're exposing themselves to of future higher carbon prices, the idea is for policymakers to introduce an idea which is all credit institutions, which is banks, as well as all fiduciary investors, which is pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, should be forced to test what will happen to their portfolio of investments if carbon prices go up to 30, go up to 50, go up to 70, and to publish this information. So the first thing it will do is it will make these entities themselves much more aware of the longer term risks that they are carrying, and would hopefully help change behavior. But second, it will give both policymakers as well as investors and savers the tools to distinguish between Fund A and Fund B, where Fund A is seen to be irresponsible. Fund A is seen to be not very prudent because it is not accounting for longer term risk, compared to Fund B, which has much less carbon risk. So it will generate new additional information, which will be very useful for regulators, for policymakers, as well as for individuals such as ourselves, who make decisions of where to put money in our pension funds, which bank to use or not. And this will significantly help increase the pool of investments that can be put into green energy.
Well, thank you, Sony. I guess with this combination of policy and finance tools gives us a bit of hope. Thanks.
Cheers.